It's Electric Drives. Your electric vehicle future starts right now. Welcome to the show. I'm Anthony Algmin, and I'm joined by my co-host, Bob Reese. We created this show to make it easier for others looking to move to electric vehicles, and that's more and more people every day. We're out there using EVs in normal commutes and road trips, and we'll share the wisdom we've gained from living our lives with electric vehicles. You can join in the conversation by sending your questions and topic ideas to questions@electricdrives.us, by joining the Electric Drives Facebook group, and by becoming a patron at patreon.com/electric drives to get exclusive content and help support the show. Bob, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good.
Excellent. So today we have a question that we're going to talk about. So I'll jump right into it. Jeff K says, I have a question on over-the-air software updates. I live in an apartment building with underground parking, and once I pull in the garage, my cell phone signal's gone. How is over-the-air updates transmitted? Is it cellular, Wi-Fi? How does that work? Paraphrasing a little bit. And then can the owner control when it occurs, and what happens when it's interrupted? So I'll let you, being the wise wizard of electric vehicles, offer your thoughts on that, even though your cars don't have the over-the-air updates.
Well, it's kind of weird because when I start my car up, the little hourglass goes around in a circle in the upper right-hand corner, and it indicates it's trying to get an update, but it really doesn't get anything. And I don't know if it's something that GM's going to unlock down the road with my 2020, or if it's just there's a lot of features on my car that I don't have, and it's probably because I'm not paying for them in some ways, because I know that my car has, if somebody's walking across the street, I can see on my car there's a person walking in the lower corner. And it comes up with that, and then it also gives such things as, warning when I'm getting too close to the car in front of me and so on. So it's not automatic braking. It's got some of the provisions. Maybe they've started to populate the cars with various software and so on for down the road, but it's not enabled yet or something along those lines.
Okay.
But I know GM at this point on my car is only going to the dealership and having them download updates.
Right.
And but I have read that they're looking to do it, and I thought it was always a natural for them because they had they used to own satellite services and so on before it became popular, so it was easy for them to utilize satellites and get updates and so on. But in going over some of the data and so on, you can see that may be not the best avenue to go. And we'll have a little discussion about that.
Yeah, well, so it's interesting because the Bolt has been around for a while, and it is kind of an older generation of platform, even though they've kept it current and they've added new models. I mean, the Bolt EUV is a new model that has been only around a couple years, and yet, but the underlying platform is a little bit older.
Oh, yeah.
And so I understand, because, there's nothing that says that an electric vehicle has to have over-the-air updates. It's a thing Tesla did and really pushed the envelope on, and is arguably still the best at. And so I think a lot of the other automakers felt that pressure to start getting much more into the over-the-air update game. And there's a wide variety of capabilities in that space. A lot of the automakers that are coming out with even new generation cars don't have over-the-air updates. It may be on their roadmap, but it is not something that they today are doing. And a lot of it comes back to the testing processes for classic automotive industry vehicles. They just have a process that relies more on the physical testing, and their confidence level in releasing bug-free software across thousands of vehicles is just not there. It's not.
Right.
I, on one hand, I find that not having over-the-air updates is a problem when what's there isn't working. That was the problem I had with my Volkswagen ID4. Anyone who owns a 2021 Volkswagen ID4 will acknowledge there are some rough edges there that should not be there. And it has taken
Right,
far
right,
too long to resolve them, either through over-the-air updates or any kind of update at the dealer. There's a lot of folks that are in that Volkswagen 2021 ownership, that first year of the ID4, that are kind of frustrated right now because they haven't gotten anything. The 2022s and now that are coming out, the 2023s, have newer software and have already resolved that issue and are starting to get over the air updates. And the 2021 people are like, hey, what about us? It's because there's hardware issues that they're actually going to have to fix and replace a 12-volt battery before they can have that happen. So it was one of those things where it's like they meant well and they wanted to enable the over the air updates, and they probably could from a software perspective, but there's a hardware issue in the car that isn't simple to fix. And it's going to require a recall and dealership service and that kind of thing. And that's a pretty substantial amount of effort. And so they're trying to get it all resolved and ready to go. It just really stinks that their most forward customers, the ones that jumped on board earliest, are the ones that are paying a much higher price. But what we're going to see across all these automakers is a wide variety. Porsche, for example, with their Taycan, high-end car by any
right.
stretch, extremely good performance, but even though it is technically enabled for over-the-air updates, Porsche says we're going to have everybody bring in the car for now because they're not yet confident enough. I mean, Volkswagen, this is still Volkswagen Group, but Porsche is now spinning off entirely from that Volkswagen Group, but it still relies on a lot of the things that have been developed as part of that overall conglomerate. And Porsche said, you know what? It's going to take, we want to be able to have a dedicated line at our Porsche service centers to download the update, install it in the car, be able to walk through all of the buttons and make sure everything's working so our high-end customers are satisfied in the end. It's a bit of a hassle to bring it up, but they'll have a better overall experience. I get that, but Porsche can provide, because they have fewer customers, they can provide that elevated level of service for that reason. Go to the other extreme, Tesla isn't going to do anything. You're lucky if they'll pick up the phone if you try to call them, which you're probably not going to get anybody to pick up the phone. So like they're on the other end of the spectrum. They're saying, you know what, we're first and foremost a software company. And I'll say, literally last night, I got another update. I'm not exactly sure what it did. It was just a small minor update. It still had the same major features that are listed on the screen when I come into it. But it was one of those things where it's like at night, I get a little notification on my phone. It says, hey, there's a software update available. I'm like, all right, let's install it. Boop, boop, boop. Come back to the car in the next morning. Everything's fine. I don't even check it at night. I don't even make sure it installed. That's how much I trust their update process. The other thing, so one thing that we should note, because we talk about these over-the-air updates like they're all one big thing, but in reality, there's a few levels to over-the-air updates. And you shared an article with me. We can certainly link it in the show notes, or you can search for this online. Is they talked about like over-the-air updates are not all the same. You can have the Tesla update, which updates anything, the maps, the infotainment, the underlying firmware. And one of the things that I think is relevant for electric vehicles, especially because the automakers that are just now getting into electric cars for the first time, they want to take a pretty conservative approach to how they're doing battery management. They want to make sure that they know and understand the longevity of this across an entire fleet of cars. And so they took a very conservative approach early on. They had to warranty these things, and they wanted to make sure that there was a ample headroom in how they're operating. Fine. But that's a great reason for over-the-air updates, is that as you get better at this, you can release software to help manage that battery better. And that's a huge piece. Now, that's scary, right? Because like now you're talking about the firmware, the core guts of your car that are related to your drivetrain, your energy source. Like if that goes bad, you could blow up your battery. Like that could go really sideways. And so these automakers, that's the highest risk thing. For a long time, some cars have been updating their maps internally over the air. Some of them are updating infotainment features or allowing you to get new. Ford was creating sketch pads and other nonsense that nobody should be bothering with. But like those are the kinds of things. Like there's that escalation. So you have what were they called? Software over the air, and then firmware over the air. That includes like drive modules and things like that. And so all over the air is what we're seeing is like the most simple is maps. Maps have been in these cars for a long time to drive GPS. Getting an over the air map update especially at no cost, like that's good compared to, like, remember they were always trying to sell like the $150 or $300 DVD updates to the GPS. That always drove
Yes,
me
yep.
nuts. I'm like, my phone's way better, and you're trying to sell me an updated map that's still 6 months to a year out of date. I actually bought one once. I had a 2003 Lexus RX back in the day, and they had created a new toll road, the 355 extension. You remember that when they added the
Right, right.
355 extension? And it took like 3 years before that actually showed up in the Lexus map update. I had bought it a year after the 355 extension opened, and it wasn't in there. And I was
Wow.
so mad. I'm like, I just wasted $150 on the thing, and you didn't even have a map update for me a year ago. And then right after that, the iPhone came out, and then I never looked back at doing in-car navigation again. I was always going to be CarPlay, although Tesla's kind of changed my mind on that. The Tesla navigation is so good, but they're still leveraging some of the same map providers that Apple and Google are using, and so like there's still some of that going on. But
Oh,
what makes Tesla so good is that they're a software company that are attached to cars. Like that's really where they shine. The car is not as well built by any stretch of the imagination from a physical auto perspective as like the Volkswagen ID4 that I had. And that's where like there is a different level of quality that varies per automaker. But when we're talking about over the air updates, Tesla is by far the gold standard. And some of the updates to cars are just, at best you might get maps. Sometimes you'll get other things. I think over time we're going to see more and more of that. But when you're thinking about what's important, this comes back to our buying conversation. Remember, like it's what's important to you, like what really matters. Now, I'd say over the air updates would matter a lot less to me if my car worked well. Like if like the charging, like if I could have scheduled charging in the car that didn't have a bunch of issues like my ID4 did.
hmm
I would be fine without as many updates. I don't need the farting car or the light show updates for
right,
Christmas
right,
time.
right, right.
That's just nonsense. That doesn't do anything for me in terms of the driving experience. But I ask you, I'm curious, Bob, because you're not going to drive your 2020 Bolt forever, especially with the number of miles that you put on it.
Yep.
I'm curious, where would you land on this? Like, do you think that your next car needs to have a lot of software updates, or do you, are what are the things that you think are going to be important to you? Say, if you were going to buy a car in the next year.
Well, part of me goes back to just thinking about computers when you update software from Microsoft.
Mhm.
And you better make sure your update, you probably want to have your computer backed up before you do it, et cetera, because there's always issues. If you're doing over the air updates, on my Volt, it's only 4G.
Mm.
And I'm not sure how reliable, and we know it's not as fast as 5G.
Mhm.
And, there's some issues along that way. And that's one of the things I think in talking, I ran into a guy who had the new Porsche
Mhm.
at the charging station over the weekend. And he said that, yeah, he has to bring the car into the dealer for the updates. And they do it that way also because it's a fast download, because they can hook
Mhm.
it right into the car rather than waiting for the cellular network. And they might have issues with the cellular network that doesn't make it a complete download. And then they might have some issues then that they don't even know about. But by taking it into the dealership, they can check all the stuff in the background and make sure that everything is cohesive.
Mhm. Mhm. It does. To address Jeff's question, I know he was most interested in the story on the GM side, which you covered. When it comes to the Tesla, so I have a work colleague who has a Tesla Model S Plaid, and I still haven't ridden in it yet. I really got to do that. But he lives in a condo in downtown Chicago, and his car's in the
Oh,
parking
garage. Yep.
garage underneath the building, and he gets no signal down there. And I will tell you,
Mm-hmm.
Tesla does not use the wireless to download their updates. They only use Wi-Fi. And so like my
Wow.
car, I was able to connect into the Wi-Fi at my house with my car with where it's situated. So I don't really have any problems with the updates. It'll just download, but it only uses Wi-Fi. And so what he will do, because he is in that situation where he has no signal in his garage where his car is parked, he literally will drive to like a Starbucks and
Hmm.
sit outside or sit in the Starbucks parking lot where he can get a Wi-Fi signal and use that to download the update. So then once the update's downloaded, and this is why, what they'll do and what the Tesla does is say, the update is ready to be installed, so it doesn't notify me when it's trying to download it. It just is doing that. And now if
Hmm.
I was in my colleague's situation, I think he can kick off when he wants to download that software update when he has a Wi-Fi connection. But for me, it's just sitting there waiting for me. It asks me, it's like, do you want to install the software update? And I can click yes, and then it gives me a 2-minute window to change my mind, because it says
Whoa.
your car will be inoperable for 25 minutes. So
Wow.
if you hit yes on this, don't use this car. You cannot use this car for 25 minutes, because it just basically is like, we are in update mode. We are in safe mode. You are not touching this car until this update is complete. Or if there's an issue, it'll roll back. I've never seen that happen, but it manages it that way. Now, I did notice in the article that you sent, Ford has actually made it so they're doing what we call in the software space more of a blue-green type of approach, where they actually go in, download the software, and effectively install it, but keep everything else live that entire time. And then when it's ready, validated, ready to go, it's been tested through its internal process
Right.
of the
Right.
update,
Right.
it then switches over. And so it swaps you over. So there's no downtime on the Ford side, that's pretty cool. Like, I gotta admit, like, that is a good way of handling that, because now you have not asked anyone to just go inoperable for their car for 25 minutes, which
Right.
isn't
Right.
normally a big
Right.
deal, unless it's a big deal in that moment. Like, unless, because you can wait. But what happens if, like, oh, my car's inoperable, now my kid just broke their arm playing outside and I need to get them to the hospital, and now I've got to wait
Correct.
for the car for 20 more minutes. Like, it just, there's times when that's really a pain. Most of the time it's not. But that's where I think having, they have plenty of redundancy in these downloads. Like, they know how to just do it in fits and starts or whatever. And there's never anything that says you have to update this right now. They don't do it that way. None of the car makers do. But there's a lot of things that could potentially cause issues or go wrong or what have you. And they do try to solve for all of those. But
Right.
something
Right.
as common as not having a good Wi-Fi signal in a garage, I can't I can't believe that it's a fair ask to have somebody who's driving a $150,000 Model S Plaid to go sit outside a Starbucks for free Wi-Fi for half an hour to go update their car. Like, that just doesn't feel like a good answer to that particular kind of problem. And that's where we've got to look at, the best way to solve that: buy a Taycan instead, because they'll just go do it at the Porsche dealership for you. In that case,
Right.
wouldn't
Right. Right.
that be more convenient? They'll give you a loaner car. Or, like, I highly recommend the cookies at the Porsche service center. They're great. Like, they have coffee and espresso bars and stuff like that. It's Porsche. They'll take care of you. It's good. The one I went to when I had my Macan, they had, like, all these old school Porsches around. Like, and the whole second floor
Oh.
was like this museum, and you could buy, like, vintage Porsches and stuff. It was awesome. And so, like, you can entertain yourself for half a day there if you had to. You work there. They have desks and stuff. One time I dumped a whole thing of coffee accidentally and kind of ruined one of the desk things, but they didn't get mad at me. They were like, "Oh, sorry." They're apologizing for me for being an idiot and spilling my coffee all over everything. But yeah, it's a different experience for different cars, and you just have to think about what is your particular situation. Your other situation too is something like, hey, if you're not going to be able to do over the air updates very easily, go with a car who doesn't need them very often. And, like, get that Chevy Bolt that's a 2022 that has, like, they've been refining that platform for 7-8 years now. So,
Right.
like,
Right.
why not get the one that it's not going to need many updates, so it's going to be fine out of the box. Don't get the first year ID4. If you're going to do that, go get the 2023, where they've had 2 years of improvements to bake in. And I think this is a finite problem right now. Like, this is a problem that we have today in 2022, at the end of 2022, and we'll have probably for the next year or two until they all figure it out. Like, it's gonna take a while. It's gonna probably be more than a couple years before they all figure it out. But it's this is a temporary problem. Just like you remember the old days. I've talked about this on the show before, but you remember the old days with the digital rights management for MP3 players,
Oh, yeah.
where like
Yep.
in those early days, none of that stuff worked. None of it worked consistently, and it was just a pain. And then they finally realized, like, if you just make the user experience good, people will pay you for the MP3s. And then they realized, well, people will just pay you monthly to have all of the music. And now everybody just streams on subscriptions. So that was the evolution. But that will lead us to our topic for next week, where we're going to talk about some of the subscription model for different services, because that's been in the news a bit lately as
Oh,
well.
yeah.
So we're going to talk about some of the implications there. So I think we've covered kind of this whole notion of the over-the-air updates. Anything we left out, Bob? You can think of anything that we didn't cover that we meant to?
Well, one thing I've noticed with My Chevrolet app is that I cannot touch the My Chevrolet app if I'm at McDonald's, because McDonald's uses SBC Global, which is, and it's come out and said it's not a secure system, because that one's really been hacked, like Hack City.
Wow.
So you can do, I can check Wi-Fi just about any other location, but not at McDonald's.
Huh.
So I think that is going to be a concern. I'm surprised that they're doing updates via Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi is even slower than doing it via cellular. And cellular would be more secure, I would think.
I do know, to your point, I think Volkswagen was only going to do cellular for that reason, where they had more control over how those data packets would get to the car on a cellular connection versus any old Wi-Fi. So like that does make some sense. Tesla's never bothered by such things, so it doesn't surprise me that Tesla's like, Wi-Fi, you just deal. But it really depends too on your Wi-Fi signal. Like, I would argue my Wi-Fi is probably better a lot of the time than a 4G signal for sure.
Correct.
It's, I think I like redundancy. I think it should be downloading them over both and trying to find whatever way it can to establish a connection and just download those packets and just kind of compile them all together, then install the update. But easier said than done. So I appreciate that, like, different approaches, different risk tolerances, different software experience. I mean, that's one other thing. Like, Tesla's been working on this for 10 plus years too. Some of these automakers just got into this game a year or two ago. So reasonable to think that there's some time to catch up there. It's not something as simple as just flicking a switch and like, you have updates now. That doesn't work that way. So
right. And I can foresee, and I've seen evidence that the Cadillac's coming out, and even the Hummers and so on are going to be able to do the updates probably before the Bolt, because the Bolt is old technology, and they'll just milk that one and drop the price as far as they can. Actually, the price is coming down, like 15,000 since it originally came out. Anyhow,
it is interesting to see how they have like these shared technology and drivetrain platforms that they have in these different cars, like is it called Ultium for GM, which they're actually taking across Cadillac, GMC with the Hummer, and Chevrolet with different models there. Like, so they can package it in different sizes, which is pretty cool. And they can share that software backbone, which I think is a great way of distributing the complexity and costs across a wide variety of cars, and it'll lead to more similar experiences with the software, because you're gonna have different screen sizes, you're gonna have different interface models, but it'll have that kind of shared experience. So I think hopefully they'll figure that out in the next couple of years and get that a lot more consistent. But some of these cars were in the next generation of platform. This is true of like Porsche's PPE platform that'll be shared with Audi and some of the other premium brands on the Volkswagen Group side. These are, they're gonna get this and they're gonna refine it and they're gonna blast it across their entire product catalog. And I think that'll be a good way of handling it versus having one EV compliance car that you barely care about, which is, would distinguish the Bolt, because the Bolt wasn't just a compliance car. It was a car that they were like, yeah, this is worthwhile. This is a thing. This is a good, economical, small car that people should be interested in buying. Up till then, everything was just like this afterthought to check a box, like, oh, for people who are super in to having electric vehicles, then we'll do this for them. But it was not the kind of like wild performance and long ranges that we're seeing now, which is really exciting. And it's definitely the software is a weak part for I think a lot of the automakers right now, but I imagine when we come back and have revisit this conversation in a year or two, I think we'll see continue seeing a lot of change in that space. So anyway, we will end it there, and do stay tuned for next week's episode where we'll talk about the subscription model and some of the things that you can buy without buying it, or you can rent it. But for this week, that wraps up our show for today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that YouTube bell icon. Please send your questions and topic suggestions to questions@electricdrives.us, and we'd love for you to join us on Facebook and Patreon. All the links are, of course, in the show notes. Thank you for spending some time with us, and we wish you a smooth road ahead on your own electric drives.